Hi, I'm Shlomi Ron, CEO of the Visual Storytelling Institute, and also your host for the Visual Storytelling Today podcast. And today I decided to pick one of the less talked topic when you think about artificial intelligence and machine learning, all these great buzzwords that marketers use, primarily I would say in the mid to enterprise level companies. On one hand, what we see is this tremendous growth rate in terms of investment. You know, the latest stat talk about almost increase of almost 20 times by 2025 to 89.8 billion. And when you ask marketers what they think about it, they all, go crazy about it. And it's actually the department that is mostly get the top dollar for investments. When you ask consumers, they also say, this is great, we like the personalization. But underneath all these positive signals, what we've started seeing is that some, I would say, overzealous marketers that sit on the, what we call the hyper-personalization spectrum, enter this red zone of kind of creeping out audiences. So, and that's something that is really the topic for this episode. In a nutshell, is how we should think about personalizing visual stories without creeping out your audience. And for this exciting topic, I have a fantastic guest here that I just came across some of his fantastic articles on LinkedIn. This is Vince Jeffs. He's a Senior Director of Product Strategy, Marketing, AI, and Decisioning at Pegasystems. He's responsible for product strategy, positioning, messaging, and thought leadership for the Pega's Decision Hub. It's their always-on customer engagement brain, which uses artificial intelligence, machine learning to optimize customer engagement. A little bit about Vince's prior jobs. He led a variety of AI and CRM roles at IBM, Unica, and Saas, just to name a few. So welcome to the show, Vince. I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So since we have this very unique angle that, as I said in the intro, not a lot of people talk about, they just tend to stay on the rosy side. Before we jump right in, maybe you can give our audience just a little bit of your backstory, how you got started in marketing technology, AI, all that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, my story goes through about four kind of main areas that eventually became the kind of perfect Martech storm for me. It took me until I was about 40 to learn what I wanted to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
But I did finally arrive there. And the first kind of area was, this marketing and visual arts area. Mm-hmm. I have an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University in the business school, and believe it or not, marketing. There's not many people that have that have degrees in marketing that actually become marketers. They usually come from all other walks of life.
That's in English, right?
Yeah, exactly. Journalism, sociologists, certainly scientists now, but I also love photography. I'm kind of an amateur photographer, and I like art, and I have several siblings that are successful artists, as well as a daughter that's a very successful graphical artist. So I guess it's in the blood. I didn't inherit as much of that artistic blood as they did. They're much better than I am, but I like it, and I have some of that in me. The second big area is data and statistics. So I discovered the power of data and how much I loved working with it after I was an undergraduate, and I had a job working for a company that did cancer research. And I did Saas programming way back when you did programming on a teletype, which there's no surprise. I'm pretty old, so there you go. but I went on to get because of that, I liked it so much, I went on to get my MS degree from the University of Maryland in database systems and operations research. So there was kind of area 2. Then area 3 was process. So my first job out of grad school was with UPS, and I was an industrial engineer. So needless to say, industrial engineers study process and get very good at that part of it. And then the last area was technology. I finally kind of put it all together when I left UPS, and I took a job with an agency called Rap Collins, part of a big ad group called the Omnicom Group. And we formed a group inside of Rap Collins we called the Marketing Technology Group. We weren't smart enough to call it the Martech Group back then, but we were building custom data-based marketing personalization systems back in 1998.
Oh, wow.
With whatever software we could get our hands on.
That's incredible.
And so those are kind of the 4 areas that kind of covers the creative, data, process, technology, and I just love the combination of them. So that's my backstory and kind of how I got to where I am today.
No, this is fantastic. It's really kind of sums it up, the right brain working together with the left brain and bringing some interesting career that you're leading right now. So, and that brings me to the topic of our podcast today, which is, before we kind of go to the different nuances, if we can just, level set the playing field for our audience in terms of terminology, because we kind of use it fairly loosely, the term hyper-personalization and creepiness. Maybe you can start at least by defining what do they mean?
Yeah, sure. I think that hyper-personalization is really all about making experiences individualistic. So tuning them and crafting them and tailoring them to the person. The creepiness factor comes in when you do that without full permission, honestly. Yeah. That's a big part of it. But I would break it down into 3 areas, and I would call those feeds, speed, and greed.
That's fantastic. I love it.
So the feeds are the data that's needed for personalization. You've got to gather that data up. There's different kinds of it. There's plenty of it these days. We lived through the big data era, and now we're well into it. The advent of it, should I say. And, all that stuff that we do every day on all these devices provides all this exhaust, if you will, that is just constantly vacuumed up by the people that are interested in doing personalization. The speed comes in, I think, with how fast that brands have to be able to react to this collected data in order to do something meaningful in the moment. So they have to find insights, but they have to act on them really fast, because if they don't, their competitors will act fast enough and take advantage of that situation. So that's the speed part. And then the greed, that's where we get into crossing the creepiness boundaries. And I wrote an article on this, on the blogs, the site I blog on called Customer Think. I called it the hyper-personalization paradox, being relevant without crossing the creepy line. And if the audience wants to read it, just Google hyper-personalization paradox and it comes up ranked 1. But basically it explores this whole area of, where these lines are for each of us. Because they're a little different. And just like anything, where you think creepiness starts, I might not. But then at some point, I find it creepy also. So marketers need to be thinking about that aspect of it and being very careful about how they roll out personalization, because crossing that creepy line can have really adverse effects.
So is it accurate to say that basically when you talk about the feeds bucket, it's basically include some variables that objectively fall under the creepiness side, but there's other variables that are on the subjective side that could vary from one person to another, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, some variables are very much black and white.
Yep.
There's also laws about certain variables, right?
Mm-hmm.
About how much you can do in certain situations with, PII data, and, and data like, data that is, by law, you can't discriminate based on,
Right.
like, sex and age and,
Yep.
things like this. So I think some of it is fairly, rigid in terms of if you cross it, you're literally doing something illegal. Um, but then there's other times we have to be very careful because those attributes can actually be underneath the covers,
Mm.
disguised in other attributes that you're feeding the machine, if you will, the
Right.
personalization machine, and it can still end up discriminating based
Mm.
on those factors, even though they weren't, the machine wasn't using those firsthand, so to speak.
I see. And just to kind of zoom out a little bit for our audience that is comprised from, just startups, entrepreneurs that maybe don't use these full-blown CRM systems and mid to enterprise level folks. Can you give us you had a very nice depiction of the variety of levels of personalization. Maybe you can give us a review so people can actually position themselves in the right bucket.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, just to make it sort of as simple as possible, I think it kind of boils down to, kind of depths of the customer knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and the value of that information to both parties. That's the way I look at it. There's a, sort of a matrix you can build with those two dimensions, if you will. So for example, knowing my first name is not deep insight, right? And it's equally not that valuable to me that that about me.
Right.
On the other hand, the fact that you can track my individual driving habits,
Mm-hmm.
is pretty deep information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how you do that, if you ask me permission and I have your app and I opt into it and you provide me with an auto insurance discount, assuming I'm a good driver, that's deeper information, but it's also valuable to both the insurer and the policyholder. So I think that's a good example of like a
Yeah.
simple attribute, if you will, that, again, doesn't really necessarily provide that much value and is pretty
Mm-hmm.
easy to personalize on. And then one that's much deeper that, you have to be careful with, again, because if you use that information without permission, that's creepy that you're tracking and surveilling me at that level.
Right, right. And just kind of a side question that I'm sure it's of great interest to a lot of folks here. A lot of people, couple steps before, using this high-end AI super systems, most likely have this one sheet with their buyer persona profile, right? that,
Right,
that is about trying to provide some sort of commonalities to their ideal customer.
right.
Obviously, few steps above that is where you feed the machine with variables that actually track behavior and both historically and also in real time, and is able to predict what should be the next best action, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it's not necessarily this like, amazing leap from small business with very little customer data and a small number of customers to big enterprise. I mean, if you're a small business and you're doing business in more than one country and you
Yep.
have customers that, speak different languages, right away you're dealing with, different cultural aspects and different attributes of those customers that, if nothing else, you should at least be putting in two major buckets,
Right.
right? So I think that's, a good example of where, there is never one persona.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, to me, I see it like the big difference, when you don't have the big machinery, you just use one piece of the buyer profile and try to target your messaging, your story, your videos according to that, holy Bible. But when you transition to a more sophisticated AI CRM system, then obviously this whole buyer persona page that you used to have is dynamically changing according to action that your customer is doing in real time. That's the big difference. So
it, yeah, Exactly, because to take that example of a small business again, you may very well know that your customer base is, let's say, very young. So you say, "Oh, I'm my product and services are interesting to millennials versus an older demographic." Well, that's great, and so clearly you're going to tune your content, your storytelling, your marketing efforts to that persona. But very quickly, you're going to have to get even a little bit more specific. And that's what we're talking about when maybe that's not hyper-personalization, but it's another degree of personalization.
Got it. So talking about the hyper-personalization problem, how big is it that you see it in the market? And can you give maybe one or two examples from the industry that can really illustrate this problem?
Yeah, I think it's actually not a huge problem yet, because I think that most businesses are not, the technology's there, but most businesses haven't fully adopted it yet. I think and we know what naturally happens, the cost of this technology goes down, it gets easier to use, there's more open source, there's more data can be collected and stored for cheaper. So we're going to see more and more of it. And I think that's why it's like it behooves us now, to start down the right path. There's a couple of pretty marquee examples of faux pas. One good one is about 5 years ago, Pinterest sent emails to unengaged women assuming they were getting married.
Wow.
Yeah, and literally, I think the quote came back from one of the tweets saying, "Pinterest assumed that I'm getting married because of all my pins about wedding stuff for my brother's wedding." And so there's a great example where they just got overzealous. They thought, "Oh my goodness, we can predict that this person is going to be getting married, so therefore aren't they going to want great information about weddings?" Another good example is, most people probably have heard this one, but if you haven't, it's a great example. And it's this one's an example of being creepy and being right, but being too personal. And so in 2012, Target had built a model, a predictive model, that predicted pregnancy likelihood, and even the birth month. So in this pretty famous case, they sent mailers out with coupons for baby clothes and cribs to those people. And well, one, it turns out, was a high school girl in Minnesota. So she was like 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
The angry father didn't know, demanded answers from the local Target store manager. He just kind of stormed into the local Target.
Right.
And said, "Why are you encouraging my teenage daughter to get pregnant?"
So I guess that predictive model was not that good, huh?
No. It turns out that he later found out she was pregnant.
Oh, really?
So he apologized.
So it was true.
But the moral of the story, so they were right. Their motto was right. But even if you're following the law and you're right, you can do things that really get people queasy that have terrible PR ramifications. So those are, I think, two pretty good stories. One where they got it wrong, but one where they got it right, but they were still crossing that creepy line.
Right, because it's not public information, or there is some other politically correct, not good advice to go forward with it. I see. Great. So, I mean, one of the things that us visual storytelling folks are interested in is, obviously, with the growing demand for visual content. We're talking about videos, there's infographics, there are tons of images that people are producing every day. Where do you see hyper-personalization come into play in visual content? And what are the things people can do to kind of watch not to cross that line?
I think it's creeping in, not to excuse the pun, everywhere. So, literally, like web pages are certainly visual content, right? And so the ability to personalize a web page and the experience that you have, so not just a static web page,
Right.
but the what I would call conversational experience you have with that website, is improving every day. So literally from the background images to the all the different spots on that website that most of the people in the field would call like containers, or spots on the specific banners or hero areas. All of those can be personalized, and all of them can be personalized based on not only the content, so in other words, the creative content that goes in there, the imagery, the fonts, the size of the text, the colors, but also the copy. So exactly what you decide to put in there words wise, and those blend together to be personalized in the form of a banner ad, or the actual static imagery. Now, when it's video, we're even seeing that to start to be personalized. And what happens is things can get inserted in line in the video.
Oh,
So
really?
literally, yeah. So you can overlay or underlay, whatever term you like, things that go into the video that are specific to that person. And that might be, things like the products that they have, that they don't have. And so in a way that's almost like subliminal. So you're putting in the video, and you see this actually, you've seen movies do this with advertisers. Now that's not so much personalized yet.
You talk
but
about
they're
product
doing
placement?
product placement.
Yep. Yeah, I
Right.
used to work in that industry a while ago.
Yeah, but think about set-top boxes now,
Yeah.
and the ability to target the geographic areas, and then to actual people that are in that household, and things that about them. So placing products into those videos that are specific to the needs of that individual.
But when you talk about the overlays that you can insert in videos, are you talking about mostly like actual graphic overlays, or are you talking about different version of the video that the actual person that's in the video can actually interact with that product?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing that. It gets a little tricky and sophisticated when you actually, first of all, if you have to have too many versions of video,
Yeah.
that gets expensive, right?
Right.
But you certainly can work in layers of graphic information. So for instance, a good example would be, a video that maybe explains your bill, or how to set something up that you've recently bought. Those kinds of things can incorporate personal data that is associated with your history with that brand.
Right. Yeah, but I think you're right. I think the major hurdle probably is still the fact that you cannot really curate videos in real time and introduce new attributes to the video itself, because the only way to do it is really by creating a separate video. And it kind of comes to mind, that classic ad campaign for Burger King, the subservient chicken. I remember where they did this insane amount of video versions, and the viewer, whatever motion he created or body movement, that subservient chicken just replicated it.
Right.
Insane. But
yeah, but if you think about it, and statistically, it's kind of proven out that even if you have just 16 versions of something, that can be very effective in getting you additional lift.
Yep, I see. So you also talked in your article that there are a lot of other implications that hyper-personalization actually focuses on, like legal geography, you mentioned culture. These are things that are mostly fall under what we call the black and white, the objective, high level variables that you can definitely break them into categories. There are rules that are very explicit that you definitely don't want to cross unlike
Right.
those objective that could be in one geo, in one culture, different from one person to another.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think I think that we've probably touched on a few of those, but you know, I think many of us are now familiar with some of the privacy laws that are rolling out, like GDPR,
Yeah.
the General Data Protection Regulation that's in the European Union, or the California Act that recently passed. And there's legislatures now in the U.S. and many states that have them, you know, that are not bills that have passed, but have been submitted. So that's very important to make sure that you're looking at those key variables associated with personalization by things like, you know, the jurisdiction that they're going to, you know, be aired in. Also, I think we touched on it a little. There's the language aspect, but that just gets to the whole cultural aspect, right? So the way, I'm sorry? Localization, exactly. So, you know, the old adage of, you know, think globally but act locally.
Yep. Yep.
Right. I think applies here, and because they can easily, as you personalize what might be funny, you know, what might be understood in you know, based on, again, just pure variables like male, female, or income, or you know, in one culture may not work at all in another culture. I think another aspect that I would pay careful attention to would be, you know, again, the creative in visual arts area. So, you know, how you personalize is really going to be important based on how people would react to, you know, the creative and the visual art, the visualizations you have. Not everybody reacts to those things the same, right? The you know, the example that we get from just the accessibility, like the fact that some people are colorblind, some people are not visual learners,
right?
Right. So most people are in some way, shape, or form, because as humans, we, you know, the lucky ones of us that have eyes that work. But we have to remember there are people that don't, that learn in more auditory. There are people that are blind, etc. So I think that's an important aspect to remember. And then I just think, we hit on this a little, but you need to think about the mass customization of product and media and services has to be matched with your ability to, you know, personalize. So an example of that is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go, you know, hyper personalizing if you've only got one product that comes in one size.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
you're not going to get very far. It doesn't really matter. But as technology has enabled us to hyper personalize products, which we can do, then you have to have commensurate hyper personalization with the media that you use and the ways that you use to personalize the overall experience that will come with both buying that product as well as using it.
And I would also add, probably to your point, that yes, there is, you know, the how many versions of your product you can customize, but there's also on the other side, how many different customer segments associated with that product. So you kind of have both sides you could actually play with in terms of the personalization effort, right?
Yep.
Yep. Cool. So let's do a little exercise here. Let's assume that I have a wide range of products that I'm about to go to market with, and I'm trying to start my creative work, developing my content marketing strategy that includes a variety of visual assets like videos, images on Instagram, and all that. And how can I stay out of the danger of annoying people with information? Or maybe let's stay in the US market for now, because obviously in different cultures you got to do different things. But how can you personalize and still stay on the safe side?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I think that you're going to want to go very slow, especially if you're in a regulated industry, or semi-regulated industry, or something like healthcare, right? The sensitivity to the data that you provide healthcare providers, and the expectation that I have as a consumer that you're going to only use it for very specific purposes that I'm well aware of is a trust factor that can't be violated, or it results in massive problems. Whereas a retailer that's selling, or like a grocery store or something, the consumer has a slightly more liberal view of their experience with that brand, and their tolerance with some mistakes, let's say, or some faux pas.
Right.
But as we've seen with the Target example, not always. So we have to be careful there. But I do think that what you should do is work kind of from the bottom up, and test. Like if you're thinking of personalizing to some extent, then don't roll it out immediately if you're not sure what the impact will be. Roll it out slowly to a very small sample. Get the reaction of those people in a sort of a protected or a contained, environment, so that if it has a bad reaction, you can easily pull it back without, you can just ditch the idea and go to some other idea. I think that's the mistake that certainly big companies have made, is they come up with these ideas, and they get all through the approval process inside the company, but they never were really tested with true consumers on the outside that could give the sense check to them, and where they could get that reaction, that sort of common sense reaction that comes from the consumer's viewpoint, and then adjust or fix those mistakes. So
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's always better to test your assumptions before you kind of boil the ocean with a full-blown campaign that you release all your creative artillery and hope for the best. So one thing you mentioned that probably will be also interesting for our audience is that obviously you mentioned there are different industries, each one retail versus healthcare, that will have wide or narrow room of maneuvering, but part of the space for playing in the sandbox, so to speak, is kind of really coming from the top of the funnel, the information capture, what you are allowed to capture, what information you're allowed to capture from your user at the top of the funnel.
Right.
Then once they're trickling down and moving down the steps, it's really what you can track them in real time, right? So there's what they do manually and what the CRM system is doing in the background.
Yeah, that's a great observation, and I think that funnel, if you will, is usually one that I would say sort of brings the real customer and the individual into focus as you build a relationship with them. So initially, as a brand, somebody might be literally just a cookie, and so you don't know them from anybody else, right, other than a device ID. And so maybe you have some idea about where the location is because you have an IP address, but that's about all you have. And then once you drive them to your, you can go get some third-party data, but that's not very reliable, not necessarily indicating true behavior of that person that's behind that device. Because as we know, different people can share devices.
Yep.
And you can do shopping on behalf of somebody else on a device.
And you get personalized content on behalf of the other guy.
Right. So that's the kind of Pinterest example that I gave.
Yeah.
But as that relationship deepens, and you get more clarity about that person, and that's called kind of people-based personalization, you're going to have the ability to do a better job at personalization. So because you're triangulating, you really get, that person is coming into focus. And therefore, and also you're probably building up a trust factor with them. And that's the trust factor that you can't violate. But if you play your cards correctly, you can deepen that relationship further and further by adding value when you personalize, because the person says, hey, great. Yes, you know where I'm going today. You know it's going to take me 10 minutes. And that was valuable to tell me that, because now all I have to do is push one button and that's where I'm going. So it made it more convenient for me also. That's the kind of the Google Maps example.
Yeah. So this mind reading capability for these systems is very important, but as you rightly pointed out, it's got to be together with adding some real strong value to the relationship, that over time that value is translated into trust and to willingness to act more on your call to actions.
Yep.
One of the things that also I found very interesting in your article, and maybe this would give a segue to this question of what is the remedy for hyper-personalization. So you talked about creating a sensitivity score. Maybe you can talk about that. You know, if I'm a marketer that I have an audience that I'm personalizing and I want to be very careful not to cross that red line, how can I create some solution for me to be able to differentiate when I'm crossing and when I'm safe?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I liken it to other models that brands develop, and a good example is a churn model. You know, most telecommunication providers, for instance, or most businesses that have some kind of a contract with a customer, and therefore it's an exclusive relationship, and therefore they're very worried about how shaky that customer is getting potentially with that brand, and therefore maybe deciding to shop around, especially as you know a contract is coming to expiration. They track and they have what they call a churn score. So that's it's not black and white. It's not on and off. It's a prediction about you know how likely you are to go try to find another provider. And so I think that you can treat, now I guess the first thing I would say is, if you can ask customers directly, ask them, ask for permission, ask them if something is is appropriate, get them to click on things where they get explanations for why you did things, and if they complain about that, record that. But in the absence of that kind of direct voice of the customer information, you can certainly put together some kind of sensitivity score to personalization, just like you could put together a churn score. And you could start out with a fairly rudimentary model that didn't do anything but just have a few rules that score something as high, medium, or low, with some obvious outcomes. In other words, it's obvious that if they made some major complaint about something you did, that their sensitivity is very high.
Very high, yeah.
Right? But you can get a little more sophisticated with that. And churn models have certainly got very sophisticated with looking at things like, in churn models, they look at, social sentiment, things that will be posted on social media. They look at network problems, like how many dropped calls have you had, and how much problem are you having with your, maybe equipment, and how many complaints you've lodged, and all these things that not one of them, alone causes a churn, score to be crossing a threshold, but usually a variety of them reach a certain, area.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think this sensitivity score can definitely be a simple approach to start differentiating the goals of your customer in terms of what level of personalization they want to get into. But I'm kind of wondering, in terms of, do you see examples where also on the front end, the user has a capability to choose, the personalization level? So basically, you just give them a few options. I feel like, I feel lucky, like Google search results for search engine, I'm looking for some sort of serendipity in terms of the content I'd like to see versus give me or let's put it very bluntly, read my mind, what I want right now. It's just two extremes, right?
Right.
So do you see those examples in the navigation flow of systems?
Yeah, I think that you can do some of that, but I could give you an example of a situation where I don't think as a brand you necessarily need to ask the customer whether it's okay if you personalize, and you personalize and they benefit from it. So that example would be, because it's kind of innocuous. That example would be if I put a web page in front of you, and for you, I put on a call to action button, see the offers. And for me, I put on the call to action button, click here.
Right.
Two different versions of something that, is very innocuous. Neither one was like incredibly controversial. And it may well be that you respond to the one that I gave you more and better than you would have to the other one.
Sure.
And I can learn that and do that, and I can use software to do that. And that's personalization. I'm now personalizing your button because I know that you'll respond to that kind of button more than you will another button. Yeah. I don't really need to tell you that.
Sure. No, I'm just curious about the range of options here. So before we close, I have a last two questions for you. Obviously, with the tremendous growth rate of AI market, where do you see the future of this space is headed towards? Because we also talk a lot about, the problems of deep fake technologies and, the fact that over personalization create this closed loop of people seeing just things that they are used to, they're not exposed to anything else.
Yeah. That's a deep question.
Yeah, just high level observations.
Yeah, I mean, I think high level is my take is there's always been sort of and always will be good and bad in the world, and that means there's good people applying technology to solve meaningful problems for humanity.
Yeah.
And then there's bad actors that use that same technology for nefarious purposes.
Right.
And you can look through human history and find every example of technological advances. You'll find that situation.
The divide.
Right. Nuclear. Right. Is a great example. Nuclear can help us with power, but at the same time, it can be used as weaponry. But overall, I'm a pretty optimistic person, but not based on blind faith. It's because when I look at technology, and including this personalization technology, things that have been, used for human advancement, they evolve, and it does create a better world as long as we allow the right governances to also play in the evolution, so that we can weed out some of that that bad, and overall things are improving.
Right.
And we've seen that with our ability to feed the world's population, our ability, with technology, our ability to make our lives more convenient for this planet to, be able to sustain the billions of people it has. If we didn't have technology, that wouldn't be possible.
Right.
So I think that the experiences that we can give people that are buying things every day, that are using things, we can use this personalization technology to make those experiences better. And legitimately, people like that when those experiences are more fulfilling, when they're easier, when they're more convenient. And that's the thing people respond to, and that's where personalization, can help.
That's so true. I mean, I see it all the time, with every new technology that's coming out. So you're absolutely right here. So I just want to kind of bring this fantastic discussion to kind of a closure, and maybe you can summarize for our audience, now that we went through all the different aspects of hyper-personalization. As visual storytellers who looking to personalize their visual content and want to avoid creepiness, what would you say your top 3 tips for them?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, wear the customer's shoes and think about how that personalization will come off from their perspective. Since, one customer is not like another, you and I are similar in some ways, but different in many others. You will need to, we talked about this early on, you'll need to use these sort of this idea of a persona test.
Yep.
And as you get more hyper-personalized, you're going to need more persona tests.
Yeah.
So that would be sort of the first tip. And then I think how you sort of, again, test and roll that out. Don't be afraid to ask for customers' feedback. As you're coming up with your hypothesis with for what the customers would want. The second tip I'd give is all content is made up of some kind of visual and storyline with copy, right? So make sure not to only personalize the visual aspects and creative aspects, which are important, absolutely, but also the scripts and the words. So the copy that goes into it and the story that you're actually telling, make sure to personalize that. And there's some interesting examples of technology that's actually out there right now. There's a company called Persado that is doing some interesting work with language personalization. So check that out and just think about that aspect of it also. The third tip I'd say, which is we've hit on a little bit, is the age-old adage of a good data-driven marketer, which is test. Get some initial
repeats. That's what I was told in my agency day.
Exactly. So get some initial data. Don't be afraid to ask your customers. Come up with a hypothesis, but then don't do anything without testing it. And test early and often. So awesome. There's a few tips.
Wonderful. I want to thank you so much for this fantastic conversation today. It's so important to touch on topics that people are sometimes blinded by that shiny object and don't consider the negative implication that could trickle in. And I think we covered that today. So just to close, if our people would like to contact you with any questions, how they can reach out to you?
Sure, yeah, and I'd be happy to field any questions. Well, I'm out there just because of technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you can Google me, so if you just Google V Jeffs or Vince Jeffs, I think my LinkedIn profile comes up ranked 1 for that, that search term. So feel free to ping me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I respond pretty well to LinkedIn messages and those kinds of things. So please do that. And if feel free, if you're so interested, to check out some of my other articles on customer think. I have about 25 of them out there on this area.
I can attest to that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Wonderful. All right. So thank you again, Vince, and for all of you watching or listening. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in our next episode. So until next time, take care and take care of your visual stories.
Visual Storytelling Today is recorded in Miami, Florida. The show is published exclusively by Visual Storytelling Institute. Learn more at visualstorytell.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on the iTunes Store. Until next time, don't let your big story wait to be told.